Hi, everybody. So this week we're going to be doing something a little bit different to end our week and begin next week. We are going to take a break from our normal lessons and we're going to be reading this book together. It's called I Survived the Destruction of Pompeii. So I know you're familiar, I'm sure, with the I Survived series. Some of you might have already read this book, and if you did, that's okay. We're going to read it through different eyes because now that we finished our unit on ancient Rome, we have a lot of new knowledge about daily life in ancient Rome and how their society worked. And you also have a lot of new knowledge about volcanoes based on what you're learning with Mr. Lyons. So as you're reading and listening this time around, if it is your second time or even if it's your first, I really want you to focus in on those aspects of the book. How are the plot events really demonstrating what ancient Roman life was like and what new information about volcanoes help you to understand why this particular volcano was so destructive. Okay, so as I'm reading, you can follow along with the text that you see on the screen, and then there are questions that will pop up as we go through. And those are for you to answer. So we'll begin today here with chapter 1. Within hours, thousands of people would be dead. The entire city of Pompeii would vanish under more than 30 feet of fiery ash and stone. But first, it was a bright, sunny summer day. Shops bustled, kids played ball in a grassy field, gladiators readied for a bloody match. Nobody yet knew that the mountain Vesuvius, which loomed over the city, was actually a deadly volcano. The mountain had been silent for centuries, a giant green triangle covered with farms and meadows and forests. It was impossible to imagine what lurked under the ground: rivers of boiling magma, swirls of poisonous gases. Any moment, the mountain would erupt with devastating fury. 11-year-old Marcus was with his father, Tata. They shouldn't have been anywhere near Pompeii. They were escaped slaves, running for their lives from evil men. But then, boom, boom, with two shattering explosions, Vesuvius erupted. Thousands of pairs of eyes turned toward the mountain, staring in shock and terror. Black, billowing smoke and ash gushed out of the mountain's gaping mouth. Vesuvius roared like a furious beast, breathing smoke and flames into the sky. And then came an even bigger cloud, shooting out billions of hot, jagged rocks that rained down on Pompeii, filling fountains, crushing roofs, and pounding down on people as they tried to flee, screaming in panic. The gods are punishing us. The world is ending. Marcus and Tata knew they had to escape. Any minute, a flaming wave of ash and gashes would rush down the mountain, burning everything in its path. But there were too many people in the streets, too many rocks falling from the sky. It was hard to breathe, almost impossible to see. And then there was a strange whooshing sound that came from above. "Look out!" Tata shouted. Marcus looked up just in time to see a massive flaming boulder falling from the sky, a chunk of fiery rock from deep inside the mountain. It was heading right for them. Chapter 2. The afternoon before Main Street, Pompeii. Marcus walked along the dusty main street of Pompeii, carrying a smelly sack stuffed with his master's dirty laundry. It was early afternoon, and the street was packed with people. Shoppers sifting through bins of pomegranates and melons, weary slaves collecting water from the fountains, beggars holding out their grimy hands. A snake charmer dozed while his cobra peeked out of its basket, tasting the air with its flicking tongue. "Salve," Marcus said, a friendly Latin hello for the deadly reptile. If only he had a basket to hide in right now. There were no good days for Marcus lately, but this day was sure to be more miserable than usual. It was broiling hot, and his ragged tunic was soaked in sweat. Even worse, his master, Festus Julius, was expecting important guests from Rome this evening, friends of the emperor. This meant even more back-breaking work than usual for Marcus and the other slaves. For days they'd been scrubbing the villa so that the mosaic floors shined like diamonds, so that every silver bowl and goblet gleamed. The guests would arrive by chariot, men in flowing white togas, women in silk robes with painted red lips, jewels flashing from every finger. Tonight, there would be a great feast of roasted flamingo, and wild boar, honey-baked mice stuffed with raisins and dates, and lobsters as big as cats. The guests would lounge on silken couches and gorge themselves until they threw up. And then, their stomachs empty, they would eat more. Tomorrow, Festus would take them all to the gladiator fight at Pompeii's amphitheater. From front row seats, they would cheer as the warriors tried to stab one another to death with swords, spears, and daggers. People were coming from all over to see the spectacle, which featured Pompeii's champion fighter. He was a giant of a man who had lost an eye in one of his early battles. The injury had earned him the fighting name of Cyclops, after the one-eyed monster from the Greek old tales. Like almost all gladiators, Cyclops was a slave who was forced to fight. But he was one of the lucky few, still alive after many battles. Just thinking about these brutal tournaments horrified Marcus. Suddenly, his body was shaking. But wait, it wasn't Marcus who was trembling. It was the earth beneath his feet. Marcus dropped his sack and braced himself against a stone fountain. A huge marble statue of the warrior Achilles looked down on him. Marcus wished he felt as brave as Achilles. But these tremors spooked him. For weeks they'd been shaking the city, putting cracks in the walls of Festus's villa, sending his spoiled dogs into fits of howling. Usually the quakes were quick, ending in just a few seconds. Most people seemed to barely notice them. But this quake was more powerful than most. The ground shuddered and shook harder and harder. Up and down the street, the sound of shattering glass and splintering wood and crumbling stone pounded Marcus's ears. Crash, crack, bang. Vendors cursed as their baskets of fruit and vegetables toppled. A bamboo birdcage fell and burst open, scattering a flock of tiny white birds into the dusty air. Barrels rolled wildly through the streets, gushing wine as red as blood. Marcus held tight to the fountain as the water inside it sloshed, splashing over the rim and soaking his tunic. And then he heard it, a creaking just over his head. Marcus looked up just as the massive marble statue of Achilles came crashing down on top of him. Chapter 3. Marcus dove to the ground, his chin smacking the hard stone. He braced himself for the crushing blow of thousands of pounds of marble hitting him. He heard a terrible crash, but he felt nothing. He peeled open his eyes and peered around. To his amazement, the broken statue was just behind him. It must have sailed right over him. Marcus whispered a thank you to the gods. Poor Achilles had lost his head, which was now rolling slowly in the street. Marcus could practically hear the warriors' deathly cries. But Marcus himself was in one piece, and the earth had stopped shaking. Marcus pulled himself up. He put his hand to his chin, and it came away streaked with blood. Otherwise, he was unhurt. A humpbacked street vendor came up to him. "Don't even think about stealing those apples," he barked, reaching down and snatching 2 apples that had escaped from his baskets. "I wouldn't," Marcus said, spotting a third hidden behind the fountain. He should give it to the man, he knew, but just the thought of the juicy apple made his stomach flip with joy. Festus fed his slaves nothing but watery gruel and old cheese. The fruit seller didn't spot it, and Marcus said nothing. "That giant beast must be restless," said the man, spitting on one of the apples and rubbing it against his tunic. "Giant?" Marcus asked. "Everyone knows that's why the earth is shaking," the man replied, looking at Marcus as though he must be stupid not to know this. There's a great beast living under the mountain. Every few years it wakes up and the city shakes. Then it goes to sleep again. Marcus thought of his father, Tata. Talk of monsters and magic always made Tata shake his head. Tata said it was only natural that people would make up stories or blame the gods for what they couldn't understand. Wild storms and killing fevers, dead crops and mad dogs. But science always held the answer, Tata believed, if you looked hard enough. Marcus didn't say this now. It wasn't right for a slave to correct the opinion of a free man, even if the man was just a poor fruit seller. What amazed Marcus was that people in Pompeii just accepted these tremors, shrugging them off as they would a rainstorm. Even now, shoppers were already back to haggling for bargains. The fruit seller turned away, and Marcus grabbed the hidden apple, slipping it into his pocket. He picked up the heavy laundry sack and threw it onto his back with a sigh. Festus wouldn't care if a monster really had come stomping through Pompeii. Marcus had better get back to his master's villa soon, or he'd be greeted with a beating. He was turning to leave when he noticed an old woman sitting in the street, dazed. The shaking must have knocked her down. Passerby stepped around her as if she were a heap of trash. Marcus ignored the woman. There were beggars everywhere, after all. But she looked so miserable. With a sigh, he once again dropped the laundry sack. He went to the woman, crouching down next to her. She was a beggar, it seemed, her tunic stained and tattered, her bare feet crusted with sores. She scowled at him. "Scat, thief!" "I wasn't going to steal anything," Marcus said. He should have ignored the hag like everyone else had. But then the woman's face softened. She studied Marcus with her cat-like green eyes. She was very old, with sagging cheeks and deep wrinkles. But Marcus could imagine that a long time ago, she might have been very pretty. "What do you want then?" she asked. Almost without thinking, he reached into his pocket and took out the apple. "Here," he said. She looked hungrier than he was. And we do have a picture here. And there he is with the beggar. The woman took the apple in one of her gnarled hands. "Help me up, please." Marcus held her arms as she got to her feet and stood with her as she steadied herself. And then she suddenly grabbed his hand, gripping it with surprising strength. "Be careful, kind boy," she whispered. "I have seen the signs. Terrible doom is coming for the people of Pompeii." She leaned so close that he smelled of strange spices on her breath. "When hope is lost, follow the hand of Mercury." She stepped back. "Do you understand?" Marcus had no idea what she meant. All over Pompeii there were statues of the powerful messenger god, with his winged sandals and helmet. But what did that matter to him? "I understand," he lied. Now he just wanted to get away from her. "The end is coming," she said, finally letting go of his hand. "This world will burn." And we will stop there for today.